The Birth of Venus, Sandro Botticelli. The story begins not with the brush but with a whisper of scandal. Imagine Florence in the late 15th century, a city of power, wealth, and rigid morality under the shadow of religion and politics. And yet, in this city, Botticelli dared to paint a naked goddess, born not of earth but of the sea. Why would an artist risk his reputation, his career, even his soul, for such a vision? That question has haunted The Birth of Venus for centuries. When Botticelli began the painting, sometime around 1485, Florence was caught between two worlds, the glory of humanist philosophy and the suffocating hand of religious authority. Botticelli himself was deeply torn. He had once been a favored artist of the Medici, men who celebrated pagan myths as symbols of beauty and intellect. But within him was also a man of faith, uneasy with desire, fearful of sin. Into this battlefield of soul and mind stepped Venus, not just as a goddess but as an obsession. He imagined her rising from the foam of the sea, delicate, perfect, untouched. Was she an echo of the ancient Roman goddess, or was she someone real? Many believed Botticelli modeled her face after Simonetta Vespucci, the famed muse of Florence, a woman who had died tragically young. To Botticelli, Simonetta became immortal through his art, not in flesh but as Venus herself, forever stepping onto the shore of eternity. The process of creation was unlike anything seen in Florence at the time. Botticelli abandoned heavy religious symbolism and strict perspective. Instead, he painted with air, with rhythm, with grace. The composition feels like music, the wind gods, Zephyr and Aura, blowing Venus gently toward the shore, their breath swirling like an invisible symphony. To the right, a nymph waits with a cloak, ready to shield her fragile body from the world's gaze. Yet Botticelli leaves her exposed, suspended in a moment between innocence and shame, purity and temptation. Look closer at the technique, the pale skin of Venus, almost translucent, painted in tempera on canvas. Unlike fresco, tempera dries quickly, forcing precision, every stroke intentional, controlled. And yet the effect is softness. Venus' body glows as if lit from within. Her hair, golden and endless, falls in waves that echo the movement of the sea. Even the seashell she stands upon feels like a relic from a dream, unreal and eternal. But the painting is more than beauty. It is philosophy on canvas. To Renaissance humanists, Venus represented not carnal lust but divine love, the beauty that leads the soul toward truth. She is both body and spirit, desire and purity, the eternal conflict Botticelli himself lived with. Some see her as a Christian allegory, Eve redeemed, reborn in innocence rather than sin. Others see her as Florence itself, reborn after turmoil, fragile yet radiant. The historical moment only deepens the mystery. Florence at this time was a city in turmoil, its pleasures threatened by the fiery sermons of Savonarola, the preacher who condemned art, luxury, and desire as pathways to damnation. Botticelli himself would later fall under his spell, even burning some of his own works in the infamous bonfire of the vanities. And yet here, in The Birth of Venus, he dared to celebrate the very thing Savonarola despised, beauty, sensuality, the pagan dream of harmony. At first, the painting was not meant for churches or public spaces. It was likely commissioned for the Medici, to be displayed in private halls, a treasure for select eyes only. But over time, it transcended secrecy. Centuries later, it became one of the most iconic works of Western art, the very symbol of rebirth, of Renaissance, of the eternal marriage between myth and beauty. The reception across history shifted like the tide. In Botticelli's own time, it was admired but not widely imitated, too strange, too pagan, too bold. For centuries it lay in relative obscurity, overshadowed by the giants Michelangelo and Raphael. But when rediscovered in the 19th century, it exploded into legend. To the Romantics, Venus was the dream of lost innocence. To the modern world, she is freedom, the power of beauty that refuses to fade. And so, as you gaze at her today, imagine Botticelli in his studio, torn between devotion and desire, faith and obsession. Imagine him painting not just a goddess but a ghost, a woman he could never have, a purity he could never claim, a beauty he knew would outlive him. Venus stands eternally on her shell, forever stepping onto the shore. She is not only the birth of a goddess but the birth of an idea. That beauty itself is divine, that art can make the mortal immortal. And as the waves crash silently around her, she whispers across the centuries, all things fade but beauty remains. Primavera, the spring, Sandro Botticelli. The story begins with a question that has echoed for centuries. What secret is hidden in the garden of Botticelli's Primavera? Painted around 1482, this masterpiece is a riddle wrapped in blossoms, a myth disguised as a dream. To some, it is simply a celebration of spring. To others, it is a coded message of love, philosophy, and even political power. And to Botticelli himself, it was an obsession, a vision born in the shadow of Florence's greatest family, the Medici. Imagine Botticelli standing before the blank wooden panel, under the flickering light of his Florentine workshop. He is not painting for the church, not for saints or martyrs, but for a private palace, a wedding gift, perhaps even a declaration of love. The air in Florence buzzes with philosophy, the revival of Plato, the whispers of humanist scholars. To them, myths are not pagan sins but allegories of divine truths. And so Botticelli dives into the ancient world, weaving together gods, nymphs and muses, to create not just a painting but a vision of paradise. The canvas blooms with life. In the center stands Venus, clothed yet radiant, presiding over a lush garden like a queen of harmony. Above her, Cupid aims his arrow, blindfolded, a reminder that love strikes without reason or warning. To the left, the three Graces dance in a delicate circle, their translucent gowns flowing like whispers of silk, representing beauty, chastity, and pleasure. And at the far left, Mercury lifts his caduceus toward the sky, as if pushing away the clouds of winter to let spring reign eternal. But it is to the right of Venus that the drama unfolds. Zephyr, the god of the wind, rushes in with force, seizing the nymph Chloris. From her mouth spill blossoms, and in the very next step she is transformed into Flora, goddess of flowers, scattering roses across the garden. It is a story of violence turned into beauty, desire into fertility, the eternal cycle of love's pain and renewal. Botticelli's technique here is almost supernatural. He uses tempera, layering colors so fine they glow like stained glass. The background bursts with detail. Over 500 plants, each identifiable, each symbolizing fertility, healing, or renewal. This is not merely a garden, it is Eden reborn. The figures, though mythological, are painted with Florentine grace, their gestures elegant, their faces tinged with melancholy. Even in paradise, Botticelli suggests, there is longing, loss, and fragility. The historical context deepens the painting's mystery. At the time, Florence was under the Medici, whose wealth and influence made them patrons of art and philosophy. Some scholars believe Primavera was commissioned for the wedding of Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco de' Medici, a cousin of Lorenzo the Magnificent. In that case, the painting is more than beauty, it is a manifesto of love, fertility, and political continuity. Venus, at the center, may symbolize not only divine love but Florence itself, flourishing under Medici guidance. And yet, behind this grandeur lies Botticelli's own torment. Like The Birth of Venus, this work walks the line between sacred and profane. Was Botticelli celebrating divine love, or was he seduced by earthly beauty? The faces of the figures, especially Flora, seem too real, too intimate, as if he painted from memory, from longing. Some still whisper that Simonetta Vespucci, Florence's legendary muse, haunts this painting too, her beauty reborn among the flowers. Reception of Primavera has always been layered with mystery. In Botticelli's lifetime, it was admired in private, a treasure for the Medici halls. For centuries it lay in obscurity, too strange for the age of Michelangelo, too mythological for a world turning toward the church. But when rediscovered in the 19th century, it captivated audiences as a vision of lost innocence, a garden untouched by time. Today it stands as one of the most studied and enigmatic works of the Renaissance, a puzzle of myth, philosophy, and desire. And so we stand before it, caught in its eternal spring. The figures move in silence, the Graces dancing, Flora scattering flowers, Zephyr pursuing his love. Venus, serene and solemn, gazes outward as if guarding a secret too great to reveal. Perhaps that is the true genius of Primavera, not that it gives us answers but that it makes us long for them. As the blossoms fall endlessly in Botticelli's painted garden, one truth lingers: spring is not just a season of rebirth, but of longing, of desire, of transformations both tender and violent. In Primavera, Botticelli captures not just the beauty of nature, but the eternal fragility of love itself, fleeting, mysterious, and forever beyond our grasp. Pallas and the Centaur. A story. A storm has passed. The sea air is heavy, the stones of Florence glisten with dampness. And in a quiet Medici villa, a massive canvas leans against the wall. On it, a strange and powerful image, a goddess, armored yet graceful, her hand resting firmly on the wild hair of a centaur. He twists, half beast, half man, his bow lowered in submission. She does not strike him. She controls him, effortlessly, with a gaze both merciful and commanding. This is Botticelli's Pallas and the Centaur. Painted around 1482 to 1485, it is not just a mythological scene. It is a mirror of Florence itself, a city struggling between chaos and order, passion and reason, desire and restraint. At this time, Botticelli was deep within the circle of the Medici family. Lorenzo the Magnificent had transformed Florence into a beacon of art and humanist thought. Yet enemies lurked: rival states, papal armies, political conspiracies. War and betrayal haunted the city. Florence needed an image of power, a symbol of control. And Botticelli, with his mystical vision, delivered it. The goddess in the painting is not Venus, nor Athena in her purest sense. She is Pallas, a form of Minerva, patron of wisdom and protector of the Florentine Republic. Botticelli gives her armor decorated with interwoven olive branches, the symbol of peace, yet she stands tall, unyielding, almost divine. She represents reason, strategy, and moral strength. And before her, the Centaur. Half human, half beast. A creature of instincts, lust, and violence. His bow hangs useless in his hand. His face twists in confusion, perhaps rage, perhaps shame. He is the embodiment of untamed desire, the darkness within man, the chaos of war. Now imagine Botticelli at work. His hand glides over the wooden panel, tracing the curve of the goddess's body, elongating her form until she seems to hover, more spirit than flesh. Her hair falls in soft waves, framed by a crown of olive leaves. Each stroke of tempera is deliberate, building a surface where the goddess radiates serenity. Then his brush dives into the beast: thick hair, muscular arms, coiled tension. The centaur's body pulses with animal force, yet his face reveals defeat, as if Botticelli wanted to show not just physical struggle, but the surrender of chaos to wisdom. The painting's background is sparse, almost abstract: a gray-blue seascape, rocky land, no distractions. The focus is entirely on the confrontation. And here lies the genius: this is not a violent scene. No blood, no battle. Instead, Botticelli captures the very moment when reason conquers passion without a single blow. But the symbolism digs deeper. To the Florentines of Botticelli's time, this was a message. Wisdom and peace, embodied by Pallas, must control the wild forces of greed, war, and lust, embodied by the Centaur. It was a direct political allegory. Florence, under Medici guidance, should triumph not through brute force, but through intelligence and restraint. And yet, there is a haunting ambiguity. Look closer at Pallas's face. She is calm but also distant, almost sorrowful. Is she in control of the Centaur, or is she trapped in an endless cycle of subduing mankind's darker nature? The painting does not celebrate victory. It whispers of an eternal struggle between order and chaos. For Botticelli himself, this theme resonated deeply. He lived in a time when Florence was both dazzling and dangerous, when humanist philosophy clashed with religious zeal, when beauty itself was questioned. Perhaps in the Centaur he saw not only Florence's enemies, but the wildness inside every man, even inside himself. When the painting was first revealed, it was likely intended as a wedding gift for a Medici ally. In that context, the meaning shifts again. Pallas as the bride, bringing peace and wisdom into the life of her husband, taming the chaos of desire. A deeply personal, almost intimate allegory hidden within grand mythology. Centuries later, Pallas and the Centaur remains enigmatic. Unlike the birth of Venus or Primavera, it never reached the same fame. Yet those who stand before it in the Uffizi today feel its quiet power. The tension between the two figures is eternal. The goddess of reason, the beast of instinct, locked in a moment of fragile balance. And as you gaze, you begin to wonder, in our own lives, who truly wins? Do we live guided by wisdom, or are we still pulled by the raw, chaotic instincts of the Centaur? Botticelli does not give us an answer. He leaves us with a question frozen in paint. Reason's hand rests on chaos's hair. The struggle is paused. But the battle is never over. Portrait of Dante, a story. A man in red stands before you. His profile is sharp, nose long, lips pressed with quiet severity. Upon his brow rests the laurel crown of poets. His gaze is fixed far beyond the frame, as though he is staring into eternity itself. This is not just a portrait. It is an invocation of genius, pain, and exile. This is Botticelli's portrait of Dante. But here lies the mystery: Botticelli never met Dante. The poet had been dead for over a century when the painter set brush to panel. And yet, in this face there is life. as if Botticelli reached across time and pulled Dante's spirit into the Renaissance world. Why? Because for Florence, Dante was not merely a poet. He was a prophet, a voice of justice, a man who had suffered exile for speaking truth to power. And Botticelli, restless soul that he was, saw in Dante both inspiration and mirror. The creation of this portrait likely came in the late 1480s, when Florence trembled between humanist brilliance and looming spiritual crisis. Botticelli was drawn obsessively to Dante's Divine Comedy. He illustrated the poem in over 90 intricate drawings, pouring his imagination into the infernal landscapes and celestial visions Dante had described. For him, painting Dante's face was not an act of portraiture. It was an act of devotion, as if capturing the source of his own fevered visions. Imagine the scene. Botticelli sits in his workshop, sketching the poet's profile again and again, guided not by memory but by manuscripts, medieval likenesses and perhaps sheer faith. He dips his brush in tempera, layering the vermilion robe, the soft shading of skin, the precise arc of the laurel crown. Each line is sharp, disciplined, as if Botticelli wanted Dante to appear carved from destiny itself. Notice the composition: rigid profile, no background distractions, no playful mythological flourishes. This is not Venus rising from the sea. This is a mind crystallized. Botticelli chooses austerity, a solemn stillness as though Dante belongs to an eternal order. The red robe blazes like fire, suggesting passion, martyrdom, even blood. The laurel crown, a mark of poetic triumph, but also of burden. For Dante, genius came at the price of exile, heartbreak, and endless longing for Florence, the city that cast him out. Here, Botticelli gives us not the poet of paradise but the poet of loss. Look at the eyes, they do not rejoice. They pierce. They accuse. They search for something beyond the frame, perhaps for the justice that was denied him in life. The historical context deepens the weight. In Botticelli's Florence, Dante was a controversial saint of the intellect. The Medici celebrated him as part of the city's glory, yet Dante himself had despised the corruption of Florentine politics. His exile was a scar the city could not erase. By painting him, Botticelli revived not just a man, but an unresolved wound in Florence's conscience. Symbolism whispers through every detail. The profile pose evokes Roman coins, placing Dante among emperors and gods, a ruler of thought rather than land. The crown of laurel connects him to Apollo, god of poetry, but also to sacrifice, since laurels were burned in rituals of purification. The severity of his expression reminds the viewer, art is not mere pleasure. Art is truth, and truth burns. For Botticelli himself, the portrait had another resonance. As his career shifted, as Florence itself turned under the sermons of Savonarola, Botticelli grew disillusioned with worldly beauty. In Dante he found a spiritual companion, a man who had walked through hell and ascended toward light. Perhaps Botticelli painted Dante not only to honor him, but to guide himself, to stare daily into the eyes of a poet who had survived despair with faith and vision intact. Reception of the portrait was quiet at first. It was not the dazzling spectacle of the birth of Venus. But among scholars, poets, and humanists, it carried immense power. To have Dante's face painted by Botticelli was like binding two flames into one, the medieval prophet and the Renaissance dreamer. Together they formed a bridge across centuries, binding Florence's soul in paint and poetry. And so, when you stand before this portrait, the silence is heavy. Dante's eyes do not soften. His lips do not smile. Botticelli leaves you in that tension, the knowledge that genius often comes with suffering, that truth demands exile, that beauty is inseparable from pain. The man in red will never look at you. He looks past you into eternity. And in that eternity Botticelli whispers, this is what it means to be immortal. Not peace, not comfort, but fire, eternal and consuming. Ritratto di dama, a story. She turns her head slightly, her profile caught in the eternal stillness of Botticelli's brush. Pale skin, luminous as marble, framed by cascades of delicately arranged hair. Her gaze does not meet yours, it drifts elsewhere, distant, untouchable. She is both present and absent, mortal and divine. This is Botticelli's Ritratto di dama, the portrait of a lady. But who is she? And why does her image still haunt us like a ghost in silk? The truth is cloaked in mystery. Historians debate her identity. Some say she is Simonetta Vespucci, the legendary Florentine beauty who died young and became Botticelli's lifelong muse. Others claim she is an idealized noblewoman, perhaps linked to the Medici circle. But maybe Botticelli never intended to reveal her name. Maybe she was never meant to be one woman at all, but the very embodiment of grace, purity, and unattainable desire. The painting was created in the 1480s, a decade when Florence was intoxicated with beauty, poetry, and power. Botticelli, already famed for the birth of Venus and Primavera, was the painter of ideals. He gave faces to myths, voices to gods, and in his women, he distilled Florence's obsession with the divine in human form. But here, in Ritratto di Dama, he turns to something quieter, more intimate. A single face, a single soul, suspended in timeless elegance. Imagine Botticelli at work. His hand moving with precision, layering tempera across wooden panel. He elongates the line of her neck, sculpts her jaw with delicate shadow, softens the contours until flesh feels as fragile as porcelain. Every stroke is controlled, yet filled with reverence. This is not realism. This is worship. The artistic choices are telling. Her face is set in profile like an ancient coin or a cameo, a nod to classical antiquity beloved by the Renaissance. Unlike the lively mythological scenes, the background here is plain, subdued, forcing all attention on her. She wears jewels, yet they are understated, almost secondary to the purity of her features. Her hair is woven into intricate patterns, as if Botticelli wanted to suggest both order and delicacy, civilization contained within beauty. But beneath the surface there is tension. Her eyes are not alive with joy. They do not sparkle. They seem detached, almost melancholic. Was Botticelli painting not the woman herself, but the absence she left behind? If this truly is Simonetta, painted after her untimely death, then the portrait becomes not celebration, but elegy, a lover's attempt to immortalize what life had already taken. The historical context sharpens the poignancy. Florence at this time worshipped women as muses of art and poetry, yet confined them socially. Women were symbols, rarely voices. Botticelli's lady, therefore, is both elevated and silenced. She is perfection, but perfection without agency, beauty sealed in stillness. It is as though Botticelli himself wrestled with this paradox. To honor women by immortalizing them, yet in doing so strip them of motion, of breath, of life itself. Symbolism lingers in the details. Her laurel leaves hint at virtue, her pearls at purity, her pale skin at untouched innocence. But look closer, the rigid profile, the faint sadness, the slight distance between us and her world. It all suggests loss, longing, a woman half remembered, half imagined. She is less a portrait than a vision. The reception of the painting was quiet in its time, overshadowed by Botticelli's mythological triumphs. But today it feels hauntingly modern. We live in a world still obsessed with images of beauty, with faces turned into ideals, with perfection crafted but humanity erased. Ritratto di Dama becomes not just a portrait of a Renaissance lady, but of an eternal problem. How we look, how we idolize, how we lose the person behind the image. Stand before her and listen. The silence around her is profound. Her lips will never part. Her eyes will never meet yours. Botticelli leaves her trapped, and in her entrapment he reveals the truth about beauty itself. Beauty can inspire, console, even save. But beauty can also isolate, freeze, and consume. And so the lady remains, a dream half alive. Her face is eternal, her soul unreachable. She is Botticelli's whisper of perfection, and his confession of sorrow.